By the end of this day, the man who had plunged Europe into its darkest chapter would be dead. The Third Reich, which he claimed would last 1,000 years, had 12 days remaining. But 24 hours earlier, deep beneath the ruins of Berlin, none of this felt inevitable to the man who caused it all. April 29th, 1945. 30 feet below ground, in a concrete tomb disguised as a command center, Adolf Hitler was still giving orders, still moving phantom armies across maps, still believing in victory that existed only in his mind. Above him, Soviet artillery pounded the Reich Chancellery into rubble. The Red Army was less than 1,000 feet away. Berlin was burning. His generals had abandoned him. His allies had surrendered. The war he started 6 years earlier was ending in total catastrophe. Yet in the Führerbunker, surrounded by thick concrete walls that muffled the sounds of collapse, reality remained negotiable. Time, in that underground maze of damp corridors and flickering lights, moved differently. Clocks still ticked. Meals were still served on porcelain. Military briefings still occurred on schedule. The rituals of power continued even as power itself evaporated. This is the reconstruction of those final 24 hours. Not the myth, not the speculation. The documented timeline of decisions, conversations, and actions that led to one of history's most significant endings. What was said in those last meetings? What was ordered? What was refused? Who stayed? Who fled? How routine transformed into finality. This was April 29th, 1945. One day remained. Everything would change. At this point in history, Adolf Hitler was no longer the figure who had mesmerized millions. He was 56 years old but looked 70. His left hand trembled uncontrollably from Parkinson's disease. His eyes, once described as hypnotic, were now bloodshot and unfocused. The man who had conquered most of Europe was confined to a bunker complex smaller than most houses. The Führerbunker was completed in 1944, designed as a last refuge beneath the Reich Chancellery garden. 2 levels, 18 rooms, reinforced concrete walls 16 feet thick. No natural light, no fresh air, ventilation systems that barely worked. By April 29, 1945, this underground fortress had become a tomb for a dying regime. Berlin was encircled. Soviet forces had crossed the city limits 5 days earlier. Over 2 million Red Army soldiers were tightening the noose. The battle was not strategic anymore. It was extermination, block by block, room by room. Every hour brought them closer. Hitler had retreated to the bunker on January 16th. He never left again. While the world he destroyed continued above ground, he descended into a parallel reality where maps could still be redrawn and victories still imagined. His remaining inner circle was small. Joseph Goebbels and his family, Martin Bormann, a handful of officers, his longtime companion Eva Braun, and soldiers too young or too loyal to flee. Outside this concrete capsule, Germany was finished. The Western Allies had crossed the Rhine. Mussolini was dead, hung upside down in Milan just the day before. The Americans and Soviets would meet at the Elbe River within hours. The war Hitler started had killed over 60 million people. Now, in his final hours, he faced the consequences. This day mattered because it marked the end of the deadliest conflict in human history. And it began with routine, April 29th, 1945. 3 p.m. Hitler emerged from his private quarters for the daily military briefing. The conference room was small, dominated by a wooden table covered with outdated maps. The air was stale, thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of diesel from the bunker's generators. General Wilhelm Burgdorf delivered the latest reports. Soviet forces had captured the Reichstag. The Berlin garrison had fewer than 10,000 combat-ready troops remaining. Ammunition was nearly exhausted. No reinforcements were coming. Hitler listened in silence. His hands gripped the edge of the table. When Bergdorf finished, Hitler began moving imaginary divisions across the map. He spoke of General Walter Wenck's 12th Army launching a relief attack from the southwest. He referenced Felix Steiner's forces breaking through from the north. Both armies existed only in fragments. Wenck was in retreat. Steiner's attack had never materialized. The officers in the room knew this. No one corrected him. At 4:30 p.m., Hitler returned to his sitting room. Eva Braun was waiting. She had arrived in Berlin 2 weeks earlier, refusing all orders to evacuate. Her presence in the bunker was the subject of quiet disapproval among the military staff, but Hitler seemed calmer when she was near. They sat together in silence. The walls trembled from distant explosions. Coffee was served in fine china, a strange preservation of ceremony. At 5:00 p.m. a message arrived. Mussolini and his mistress Clara Petacci had been executed by Italian partisans. Their bodies were displayed in Milan, hung upside down at a gas station for public humiliation. Hitler read the report twice. He said nothing. But something shifted. The afternoon continued. Dinner was prepared. Conversations happened. The bunker followed its schedule. Above ground, Berlin burned. 6:00 p.m. Hitler summoned an officer he trusted. He asked about the reliability of cyanide capsules. The question was clinical, detached. The officer confirmed the capsules were from SS supplies. They were effective. Hitler nodded and dismissed him. No explanation was given. At 7:00 p.m. he requested the presence of a city official authorized to perform civil marriages. The request surprised no one who knew what was coming. Eva Braun had waited 12 years for this. In private, she had always called herself his wife. Now it would be official. The ceremony was scheduled for just after midnight. At 8:00 p.m., Hitler called for his secretaries. He began dictating 2 documents. The first was his personal will. The second was his political testament. His voice was steady but tired. He spoke slowly, pausing frequently. The typist, Traudl Junge, transcribed every word. In his political testament, Hitler blamed the Jews for the war. He expelled Hermann Göring and Heinrich Himmler from the Nazi Party for treason. He appointed Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as his successor. He ordered the continuation of racial laws. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of responsibility, no remorse. At 9:30 p.m., he ate a light meal with Eva and Joseph Goebbels. The conversation was subdued. Goebbels mentioned that his family would remain in the bunker. All 6 of his children were already asleep upstairs. The decision had been made. None of them would survive the collapse. At 11:00 p.m., Hitler reviewed the marriage documents prepared for the ceremony. Everything was in order. His hands shook as he held the paper. Outside, Soviet shells continued to fall. Inside, the illusion of control persisted. Midnight approached. A wedding in a tomb. 12:00 a.m., April 30th, 1945. The wedding began in the map room. It lasted 10 minutes. The officiant, a city councilor named Walter Wagner, had been brought to the bunker under armed escort. He wore his Volkssturm uniform. His hands trembled as he read the brief civil ceremony. Hitler wore his military jacket. Eva wore a black silk dress. She signed the registry as Eva Braun, then crossed it out and wrote Eva Hitler. Her lifelong wish fulfilled in a concrete room 30 feet underground. Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann served as witnesses. After the ceremony, champagne was opened. A small celebration followed in Hitler's sitting room. For a brief moment, the atmosphere lightened. Eva smiled. Old stories were shared. Someone mentioned peacetime. The illusion lasted less than an hour. At 1:30 a.m., Hitler withdrew to finish dictating his testaments. Both documents were completed by Führerbunker a.m. 3 copies of each were made. Messengers were selected to carry them out of Berlin. Their mission: escape the Soviet encirclement and deliver the documents to Donitz and the remaining Nazi leadership. Most would fail. At 5 a.m., Hitler finally went to bed. Eva joined him. They slept for approximately 3 hours. It was the last sleep either would have. At 8 a.m., they woke to the sound of intensified shelling. The Soviets had begun their final assault on the government district. The Reich Chancellery was now under direct fire. Breakfast was served at 9 a.m. Hitler ate little. He asked about the possibility of breakout. His adjutant, Otto Günsche, informed him that escape was no longer feasible. Soviet forces controlled every route. The encirclement was total. Hitler accepted this without argument. The afternoon would bring the end. 10 a.m. Hitler began his final farewells. He moved through the bunker corridors, shaking hands with staff, secretaries, and remaining officers. His grip was weak. He said little. Some witnesses reported tears in his eyes. Others remembered only emptiness. At 1 p.m., he lunched with his secretaries and his cook. The conversation was mundane. No one mentioned what was coming. At 2 p.m., Hitler summoned Otto Günsche. He gave explicit instructions. After his death, his body was to be taken upstairs, doused with gasoline, and burned. Nothing was to remain for the Soviets. Günsche understood. At 3:15 p.m., Hitler and Eva Braun entered their private sitting room. The door closed. Otto Günsche and Martin Bormann stood outside. At approximately 3:30 p.m., a single gunshot. Silence followed. The door was opened. Adolf Hitler sat on a couch, a gunshot wound to his right temple. A Walther PPK lay near his right hand. Eva Braun was beside him, dead from cyanide poisoning. No struggle, no hesitation. The bodies were wrapped in blankets and carried up the stairs to the Chancellery garden. Gasoline was poured. A match was lit. The flames consumed what remained. By May 2nd, Soviet forces discovered the charred remains. Dental records later confirmed the identification. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe ended. The Third Reich, which was promised 1,000 years, lasted 12 years and 4 months. This was day falling. One day, everything changes.